Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Data Science Mentor Program. Today going to we are looking at part 2 of multiple subplots. This is the 12th episode or 12th session in our data visualization series. Right. My name is Pablo. I am founder, convener, and host of the Data Science Mentor Program. Right. So if this is your first time, then and you're live, it means you're following it. If it's also your first time, just take and you haven't seen you've not followed our introduction to Python, introduction to numerical Python for data analysis, introduction to pandas for data analysis, just pay close attention and pick up the things you can, but don't stress yourself to say, oh, I have to get everything right. And if you have questions, feel free to indicate or drop the questions in the comments side of things. Right. Last week we introduced subplots. Right. With subplots, it's helpful for seeing the different sides of data. So you're visualizing data, and you group your data into smaller plots, and they all exist in a single figure. Now, there are lots of things. In the last session, we basically did an intro. Now, in this session, we are going to look at multiple subplots in different ways. We are going to look at multiple subplots and look at them with low-level parameters. When I say low-level parameters, I need you to. What I want to show you is maybe you want to look at plots, multiple subplots, and look at the different ways they would turn up with different what I call it, different parameters, and what's the implications of these parameters are. Right? It's important to see that, because somehow we always learn stuff, but we always learn it in a very nice way. However, there might just be ways that look rough around the edges. So today we're going to create an axis and then insert axis in some corners of the axis by setting their positions. This is one of the first things we're going to be doing. So let's start out. Again, I'll start off by importing pandas. I'll start off by importing matplotlib.pyplot as PLT. I'll import numpy as NP, and then I would use I would want to put let me see if I can. Let me run this. And then I always like to talk about style. So plt.style available. I like to look at different types. So let's see what it's like to use. Let's see. I've not used this before, but let's see what it looks like to use this style. So over here, I'll come and say plt.style.use, and then we use the style. So it's like a background style. We're going to see what it's like. So I run this. Then for this, I'll just take it out. If the style does not look really fitting, we'll just remove it. We'll just take it out. But again, it's just it's a learning curve, so it will be interesting. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to plot. We're going to create a plot. It's like a standard axis, and then look at how we can insert axis into our figure. Now, to get started with this, I would basically go ax1, and here I'm going to use plt.axis. I'm going to use this. This is typically like a standard axis. And then I'm going to go Ax2, and I'm going to say PLT dot axis. Now PLT dot axis adds axis to a current figure and makes it the current axis. Now we're going to do that. Now there are with PLT dot axis, you can see that we can put arbitrary number of keyword arguments inside of it, and that's what we're going to check out and see what it looks like to put these parameters together. Now, what's interesting that we want to set our X and Y axis position, right? So look at this. So we put this, I put a list. In the list, we're going to have like starting positions for the width and the height of our figures, right? So we would have 0.65 here, 0.65, then we're going to have 0.2, 0.2. Let's close this. So this is like, starting the width. So we're saying, look, 65% of our width, right? And 65% of the height of the figure, right? And then we are now also going to say the size of the figure is what we're looking at too, in terms of 0.2. So this is like percentages. Now, I'm going to visualize this so that it gives us a sense of what we have. PLT.show. Now, can you see this? Oh, okay. Let me introduce. Let me say PLT.figure, so that we'll make it a little bigger so we can see PLT.figure. And here we'll put our fig size. And then with our fig size, we will put a tuple of, let's say, 8 by 6. So let's see if it makes this big enough. Oh, it's big. It's bigger than normally is. Okay, let's make this 6 by 6. Right, so you can see now you can typically see you can now see what we're talking about when we are trying to insert an axis into our figure, right? And it's interesting how we can see our width. We can look at our width, and we can also look at our height of what we're doing. And this is an interesting part with, here, where in the first part of what we did in the last session, we typically just created these plots. And it's interesting to see that we can imagine if I change this to this, and then I run this. Now you can see what we're doing. You can see that we are moving our axis into different places, right? If I was to make this 1, now you can see what's happening. Now, this is like typically looking at the percentage of the width and height of the axis. You can see that it's the size is what we're dealing with. If I was to put this back to 2.5, 25%, and make this 25%, you'll see like, oh, this is growing. And then if I make this 75%, and you can see where it has gone to. So you can see that with the first two, you're moving the directions of your axis, and with the last two, you are, the size. Now, if I made this 20%, and see that this is where it is, right? So again, a lot of things are interested in the way we can manipulate the figures we have here. right? The way we manipulate the figures we have. If I was to let's if I make this 5 by 5, let's just also see what that's. You can see that as we change it, a lot of this stuff is changing. You can see well, how such an important aspect of what we're doing. We have our on the left our axis, and we can see how figuring out the sizes, figuring out how our axis looks is even important in trying to insert insert plots inside of them. Now there are other ways. So again, like I mentioned, this session we're going to look at how we can use several parameters to control our figure and our axis, right? And yeah, so I want us to see a lot of these things instead of typically just looking at our when building, excuse me, building our figures. We just basically think that there isn't much to it. We just build stuff and keep going, just like what we did here. Of course, we used some features, but this was our last session, right? But here we're going to look at we're going to go do a little bit of a deep dive into how we can manipulate a lot of things. All right, so let us try out something else again. Now I'm going to use a single plot, two plots or two axes in one figure, right? So let me do this, and then we'll try as much as possible to also try and manipulate the parameters to see what we have. So first of all, I'll start off by creating fig, plt dot figure. I'm not going to introduce the width and the height yet. Then I'm also going to start off with ax1. Now I'm going to use we used it the last time, which is a figure just to add axis inside of it, right? So I'm going to use this. We're going to say fig dot add underscore axis. Now just like we did before, let's say 0.1 here. And a lot of these things, you learn them, they are pretty intuitive, but when you try them out, you start to see, okay, what is it? What are we doing? How does this affect what I'm building? So 0.5, 0.8, and 0.4. That's one. Then we're going to introduce some called, we're going to introduce this X tick labels. Here we're just going to leave it as is, and then we can say the y-axis limit. With the y-axis limit, we can set limits like maybe minus 1.2 to 1.2. Right, now I'm going to now create Ax2, and in Ax2, this is going to be our second axis here. Second axis we're going to have. Now, this is basically before we it's like before we introduce our plot, we are building. It's like building stuff. Then we will now throw whatever plot we have instead, whatever we want to visualize inside of it. So in the second plot, we're going to again use fig dot add underscore axis. Then here we have 0.1, comma, we have 0.1, and then we have 0.8 and 0.4 cells. Then here we are going to say y axis limits is going to be just like the first one. I have -1.2, comma 1.2. So this is it. We've created this, right? So which means this guy is here. So again, I've called this. I shouldn't have, but I've called it. That means if I use plt dot show, I probably have two things in the background because something's already in the background waiting. Now I'm now going to create our data. I say x is np dot lean space np dot namespace, and then we're just going to go from 0 to 9. Then we're going to say for x1, what we're going to put inside is we're going to plot a sine wave, right? And then for x2, we're going to plot a cosine wave. Right, we're going to plot a cosine wave. Right, and so this is it. So basically, this is our plot. We've built, sort of like built it, and then we now come over here to introduce our data inside of it. So let me come over here and say plt.show. Sorry, if we see two plots, just know it's because I have done, I told you if you see two plots, it means I've done something I shouldn't have done, right? When I created the first plot, this happened. And again, if I run it again, so I'm just going to have one plot. Now, interestingly, it's small, right? Because we did not do stuff here, but let me come in here and introduce fig size. And fig size here, let's do 5 by 5. And so now it should be big enough. Oh, apologies. It should be big enough for us to see what's inside. So you see, now you can see that we determined what we're going to have in terms of the first spot here being our sine wave and then our cosine wave. We did a lot of determination on how these things would happen by setting this up. Now in the two axes, if you look at the first, if you look at, you can look at it, you see the first one, we don't have any tick labels because we came over here and we ensured that we don't have tick labels to it, right? And then we introduced the tick labels. We didn't put them here, and then by default we introduce our tick labels here based on what and how our sine wave is, right? Any other thing? So again, if you look at both of them, you would get a sense. You can also see that some interesting things are happening. It's like they're not using independence. You can see over here. They have the y-axis. It's like both figures or both axes have their own y-axis. And they all have their own y-axis limitations. You can see starting from this. Now, this is typically creating a subplot, right? And this is the first step in this subplot. Now, what if we needed to do a bunch of things in our subplot? right? So this is just one. Now, the next thing we're going to create in order to show us different ways or different intuitions for how our subplot works, we'll create like subplots that have you know, different, a whole lot of things going on in it. That's what's going to be the second part of it, right? And hopefully by the end of what we have done, we'll see what it looks like to put actual data into it, right? Just give me a second. Yeah. Set to control for sound. So this is the first part. My hope is you can pick up this and then try to manipulate it and see what it's like when you're done. You can now see what what you've built or what you want, where you want to put your visuals in. Now we can also so here what will I call this? Let me just call this building for plots. Let me just call that, give that name. Building for plots. Now, this second part of what we're going to be doing is imagine having like subplots but with grids, right? And each grid has different plots inside of it, right? And this is stuff that happens. It's you use it and you build, and you build a lot inside of it, and then you sort of figure how you can control some of the things you have inside. So this is the next one we're going to do. Now, in essence, we'll create a single plot, and then we have grids within a single maybe subplot, or we can create a single plot subplot within a grid, right? And then and break down and then break it down in several ways. We'll have arguments, we'll have number of rows, we have number of columns inside of it. Now, also another interesting thing about Matplotlib is with Matplotlib, you get to manage a lot of moving parts. Hopefully, as we go down, we're going to work with Seaborn and see how a lot of these ideas have been reorganized, right? But it's important. I think it is important for us to be able to manage a lot of the moving parts, because with that you have some level of control, and when you have some level of control, there's a leverage to it, right? So everything is typically a trade-off. So the interesting part is what part of the trade-off you're willing to take, and so yeah. So here, let's do a simple grid of subplots. So that's what we're going to have here. Simple grids of subplots. So I'm going to do this really quickly, right? So we can see it. So I'm going to use a for loop. So I'm going to say for I in range. For I in range, I'm going to say maybe we're going to have from 1 to 6. Right, we're going to have it from 1 to 6. Now we're going to have plt.subplots. And inside our first subplot, we're going to have 2, 3, and I. Right. Then, and I know, of course, the I here is going to reference what we have. Right. It's going to reference what we have inside our range. Now, the next thing is we're going to have plt.text. With plt.text, we add text to our axis. Right. And so here we are going to have 0.5 0.5, and then str, which is typically what we'll have inside of it. There's a string. So here we have 2, 3, and I. Then we can also go on to look at fonts. So we say font size is equal to 16, and again, I think it was important that we looked at a bunch of things we could do inside here. You can see there's a bunch of fonts we can put in here, and there's other arbitrary keyword arguments that we can throw in there, right? You can create text, we can create a bunch of stuff inside, right? So again, I'll encourage you to look through this. We can, align our different figures, the different, call it maybe the different objects that will be inside of it. So we can also center it. Use center, right? And then run this. And let's see plt.show. Again, should we set, let's set the plt.figure. Let's put this. Right. So you can see, again, a lot of things are typically important, interesting here. You can see how we have looked at this. Let me see if I do this 6 by 4. Should I? No, let me do, should I do 6 by 6? Let's see how this will look. 6 by 6, right? Now, you can see that inside of what we have, you can see what we have going on here, right? We have tried to we have different columns in here, 1 to 6, right? And of course, you can see for I in range, that's why you see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inside, right? So it feels like we're converting them into strings once we put them inside. Now, again, this is an opportunity to see how we can do a bunch of things, right? We can basically create a subplot, but now this subplot it looks sort of like all over the place, doesn't it? Now, let's now see if we can basically adjust this plot we have. We've already done the first part of it, and let's see if we can adjust it. And when we adjust it, we can adjust for a lot of things like height space, right? We can adjust for height space, we can adjust for width space and all before we get started. So this is the first part, right? And so let's come over here and say, let's call this adjusting adjusting subplots. Let's call this adjusting subplots. Now with this, I'm going to start off again. So I'll introduce Fig. Now I'm now introducing again the object-oriented stuff we're going to be doing. So here I say plt.figure. Now it's important that I'm going to introduce my 6 by 6, the fig size. And fig size, we're going to have 6 by 6. Right. Next, we're now going to introduce, we added before, we're now going to have something called subplots.adjust. So here we're going to say fig dot subplots underscore, excuse me, underscore adjusts. Now with this, we can adjust for a bunch of things, right? You can adjust subplot layouts and parameters, right? And you can see the different things we can go for: left, bottom, right, W space, H space. So you can see for H space, the width of the padding between subplots. For W space, the H space, the height of the paddings. So let's start off with the height, right? Now we say H space, and then let's try out with this. Say 0.4, W space, and say 0.4. That's the first part. Now we've done this before. We now want to now introduce what we did here. So again, I'll just come over here and I'll bring this. Right, so you see, we've done this, and now we are. Did I miss out something? Let me look at my notes. No, I did not. But there's something new here. So just to be sure. So for I in range, yes. So yes, there's something different. What we are going to do is we are typically going to add some things. We're going to say we're going to introduce arcs here. Right, we're going to introduce arcs here, and then from here we're going to do fig dot add underscore subplots, and then open brackets. Okay, this works. Then the next part of it, we're going to say arcs dot text, and so we have this, right? We have the font size. Let me bring down this font size here. And then, yeah. Then let me run this. Hopefully not a problem. Then I'll say plt dot show. And so let's see what we have going on. Now you can see that, contrary to this, there's been a lot of, rearrangements. Now it's starting to look good. Right? So width space, it's there. You see how that looks, right? See our text is also there. So yeah, again, we can work on, if we made this 5, let's see, just to look at what this is, and then we'll bring it up. You can see how this it looks. You see the height and all. So the height, I can choose to make the height 3, and then see how this reduces. Is it the height or the width space? Let's reduce this again, just to see what this looks like. So the different things, you can see how they change and all. We can increase our fonts. Let's make it 18. Let's see what that looks like. Right. So again, here you can see we have sort of like worked on a few things. You can see over here, they seem to be all over the place, but here it seems to, there seems to be some sort of sanity, right? So we've typically used H space and W space to, introduce spacing along the height and width of the figure inside of it. And we're now using like 40% or 50% of the subplot width and height, depending on what it is, or 30% of it. So that's basically what this is, right? Now, there are other things we can do, right? We can a lot of the time this can become tedious when you're creating a lot of stuff, and sometimes you also want to get to a place where you want to control certain things, especially your X and Y axis. All right, you want to control your X and Y axis. For instance, you can see that over here, you can see our X and Y axis is shared. Now, what if we decide on how we want our X and Y axis to be? And so we're going to introduce something. So what I'm going to do here is, let me call this controlling our X and Y axis. So I call this controlling the axis. So we let me see, let me bring this guy here. I want to have a 6x6 here. Then so we have our fig and our axe. We have our fig and our axe. And here we now want to plot. Now we're going to introduce something. We're going to say plt dot subplots. Now we're going to, here we can control a lot of things. You see this share X and share Y, really interesting stuff, right? So look at this. Imagine we say 2 and 3, comma, then we have share X. And now when we share X, we want to say share X. And what are we going to have as our share X here now? Let's say we share X and we say, we call this call share Y, and then we put this row. Right, so we have this. Now, let me check this. It's already there. I have run it. So if I say plt.show, just don't be surprised to see two things show up, right? This is 600 plus 600. Hold on. So typically what you can see here is one, just a bit. So basically we have like 2 rows, right? And we have 3 columns. I'm just wondering, why do we have our small distance? Okay. Fig size was 6x6. Okay. Yeah, so now just let's now focus on focus on first stuff. Now now we're looking at just a bit. Sorry, I'm sort of like let me see, 12 by 12, right? So it's 1200 by 1200. Figure size. All right. So, I mean, with axis and 0, should we determine something with the axis? Go first. There's something I'm missing out on, but the bottom line is, we can think, you can see that sort of here we have started to look at how the columns and rows look like, right? Now the next we're going to do is we are going to determine stuff. With this, you can see that it unlike where every other x-axis here, the y-axis seems to be shared by this guys here as the row, and the x-axis is the column. You can see that it's a determination of the way you can share these columns. Now, by specifying the share x and the share y, you're automatically, removing a lot of the inner labels that exist inside, right? And this basically makes it pretty easy for you to not make it, it's all clunky here. Everything is just in here. But here doesn't actually tell the real story, right? There could be a lot of complicated arrangements, right? And we want a situation where we want to control a lot of things. And this, and I'm going to create this in a bit. I'm going to share the code as quick as possible, and then we can see what happens. So let me just get the code, and then you can see what it's like when you create a figure and then determine a lot of things in that figure, right? Now, this aspect of it is known as is where we introduce something called grid spec, right? With grid spec, we can determine a lot of things that are different moving parts inside our visuals, and it tells a lot. So I'm going to just show it so that so it doesn't get too long, and we just wrap up what we have going on. So here is it. Where is that? All right. So the first thing I would do, and so here we're going to visualize and control, but this time we're going to use, we're going to have a flexible grid alignment, and we're going to do that with, setting them up with something called grid spec. So here I'm going to visual plot with grid alignment. So we're going to plot with grid alignment. So that's what we're going to do. And then I'm also going to introduce a grid spec. So this is what this is going to be. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to create our data. It's going to be our data here. This is our data. We're going to have this created. Just so you know, look at what our X. So this is like what the data looks like, and we're going to use all that. Now, this is the first part of it. Next, we're going to now we're going to have our figure, which is typically what we will do. So here we will set up our axis. So, but here we'll set up our axis with grid spec. Now, to do that, we're going to call on, so the first two things we're going to do here is I'm just going to, so that we don't write the code over and over again. Let's say free spec. So here I introduced this. So of course, this isn't surprising to you. And so, but this is the grid spec here. Now with grid spec, just look at the documentation here. It's a grid layout to place subplots within a figure. So we want to determine the location of the grid cells, basically. Right. So that's the first part of it. Now we are now going to do a few things that we've done before, but this time around we're going to create histograms. So here we have we call this our main axis. So we add our subplots here and we introduce our grid. So you see this. Now we have here, this is going to add our grid. Here is not going to have our labels, just like we introduced earlier on. Then in our share, we're going to here we put what we're going to have our y-axis as this here, and we're also going to do the same thing with our x-axis, and our y-axis also would not have it would not have ticks, and of course our x-axis would be typically like it. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to introduce a scatter plot. Now when we introduce our scatter plots, we're going to basically set them up using our sort of our marker. And remember in our earlier introduction, when you introduce a marker based on the data we have, right, the marker would basically use an intuition to say, okay, this is what we're visualizing. So, but this is a scatter plot. So this is basically what I'm going to introduce here. Right, so we've introduced a scatter plot here. Now, pay attention. The interesting part of it is this guy, right? And again, I want us to see what it says. The location of the grid cell is determined by a bunch of things. But what we're trying to do is to place subplots within a figure. So now we have a scatter plot here, and we are now also going to have histograms, and we're going to determine how these histograms, these X and Y histograms, are going to look. We're going to set up the way they will look. We're going to put them in steps. We're going to have step field. We're going to determine how they're going to look. Is it vertical? We're going to add the colors to them and all, and then we'll see what it looks like. And so this is basically what I'm going to do. Just going to introduce this last part here. Now we now have a scatter plot. We're now going to have a histogram, and of course we're going to determine a bunch of things with our histogram. Again, if I come to the documentation for our histograms, we have a bunch of things set up. We have a way we want them set up in terms of the step field, in terms of this, where the position they are going to take, right, in the different aspects of our in the different aspect of our figure, right? Just you see over here, if I go back to what we had done earlier on, you can see just like these guys over here, where we did a determination of where they would be, right? But here, because we have a grid spec, our grid spec, we're going to do a bunch of determination to that. So I'm going to run this. So which means, again, like I told you, all I have to do is use plt.show. Again, you can use plt.show so that you don't have too many things at the same time when you call it. But you can see what we've done here. Let me see if I reduce this. Let me reduce this and see if, I hope it looks better when we reduce it, bro. Right, so you can see, just so that we can see everything here. So you can see what we've done, right? With grid spec, we can typically do a lot of arrangements here. We've typically figured a bunch of things here. We use step field in our hist type, and there are a bunch of if we look at a histogram within the matplotlib documentation, there are different things we could have used. It's typically like what we had done earlier on. Let me see if I have something similar. Oh, no, I don't. Okay, that will be a different class. Maybe it was in the data science on the session. But so this is what we have here. We have our histogram over here. You can see it here. This is what this is. And you can see how with the histograms here, this y-axis here is being shared by the scatter plot. And the scatter plot is going to be sharing the x-axis over here, right? So and basically, you can see with the interesting one, what I like mostly with the grid spec is how we can basically keep this guy here individually using our MATLAB style for visualizing, and then this is determined by this. This is like plot style, right? And then of course the marker style, and then of course how transparent we want it to look. And then of course we come over here and then set this, its orientation to vertical, this orientation to horizontal. And then with that, we can ensure that we've set our histogram and the way it will be its orientation. And then eventually we can also invert the x-axis too, so that, you know, it can be intuitive, right? So this is, again, this is played a major role to this. And this wasn't here when we were building a lot of this, right? And also by controlling our axis, we use this guy with the share X here for column and rows. And we try to be really cute with it, the way we shared it here, right? So you can see they are sharing X and Y axis here. Look at that, right? Same thing is being shared here. So this is basically the part of in what we are doing is how we are trying to build visual and then controlling this visual, controlling the different moving parts. Now I know this is a huge departure from what we did in our last session, where we focused on just building our visual, just an introduction. But now, if you and I will encourage you guys to watch this again, you would see that there's a lot of things that you can, you know, manipulate. Also, the idea here is to also have your own data. Whenever we are creating stuff like this, we tend to just create random data and just, you know, manipulate it using NumPy routines. But again, you're going to have data that will typically look something like that generally, and then now use it to visualize stuff. So please try out with regular data, see what it looks like. But the bottom line here is we can manipulate data in many ways, right? We can manipulate our visuals in many ways, and use grid spec to determine our X and Y axis. So just to recap, at the very beginning of the session, we started off by, you know, looking at a subplot and how to determine a bunch of things in our plots. Then we went on to, you know, have two plots inside of one figure. And then we now looked at simple grid plots inside of the figure. Now, of course, as we went on, we can see that there's a lot of chaos happening. And then we decided, you know what, we could adjust our plots, right, that make them look better. But at the same time, what's more better than to align our plots and, you know, determine the layout. And so we introduced grid spec, and with grid spec, it was easy for us to build our visuals. And typically, let's not forget, what we're trying to do is tell stories with our data, but at the same time, you know, the foundational, you know, building it from scratch is ideal. So yeah, so that's what we have for today's session. What we have done in today's session is typically focus on a lot of parameters, and I said it before, we started out, we are going to do a lot of this, right? And so yeah, this is it. Another thing I didn't mention was our use of color. Look at that, we used gray. I'm just curious, what would happen if I used black? Just, I'm telling you guys, it's just me trying this out, right? Yeah, so you can see the difference, right? And also, yeah, black looks better though. So yeah, the black looks better. Sort of like, yeah, you can see how that looks. So yeah. All right, guys. If you have questions, please drop it in the comment section. If you are watching a recorded session, please drop your questions in our Telegram channel, right? And so that is the end of this session.